The Murderer Who Left Yelp Reviews: How One Man Exposed His Own Crimes. The 17th of August, 2019, Chicago, Illinois. The first review didn't seem that strange. It was posted on Yelp under the username MidnightMan88, reviewing a small Italian restaurant on the outskirts of Chicago. It read, "Great food, terrible service. The bartender was rude, and the guy at table 7 wouldn't stop talking. He should have shut up while he had the chance. Won't be coming back." No one paid attention to it. Just another grumpy customer complaining about something no one cared about. But 3 days later, the man who had been sitting at table 7 that night was found dead. A murder that didn't make sense. The 20th of August, 2019, a man named Derek Hudson, 42 years old, was found in his car, shot execution style in an alley 2 blocks from the restaurant. No witnesses. No security footage. No apparent motive. It wasn't a robbery. His wallet was still in his pocket. It wasn't a carjacking. His keys were still in the ignition. The only clue? A receipt from the Italian restaurant timestamped 8:52 p.m. the night of the review. Police checked surveillance footage from inside the restaurant. Derek Hudson had been sitting alone at table 7. And 2 seats away, a man in a dark hoodie, barely visible. The camera angle wasn't great, and the dim lighting didn't help. The hoodie's drawstring hung loose, shadowing the man's face. He didn't look up, kept his head low. A quick glance, a sip from his drink, always facing away from the camera. Detectives interviewed the staff. The bartender remembered Hud's "quiet guy, no trouble." The waitress recalled a brief conversation. Hudson had been polite, a good tipper. Neither had noticed the man in the hoodie. "He could have been just another customer," the bartender said. "Or maybe he left before I realized." They checked the footage from the alley. Nothing. No cars pulling in or out. No one walking nearby. The camera on the corner streetlight had been disabled weeks earlier. So the case went cold. The second review. 2 weeks later, another Yelp review appeared. This time, it was for a cheap motel in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The same username, MidnightMan88. Disgusting rooms. The sheets had stains, and the guy in the next room wouldn't stop making noise all night. "It's quieter now. Won't be staying here again." Again, it seemed like nothing. Just a frustrated guest venting online. But the very next day, the motel's manager found a body, room 214. A man named Brandon Lowe, 37, was found stabbed to death. His body wedged between the mattress and the wall. Once again, there were no fingerprints, no forced entry, no security footage of the killer. The only thing police knew? Brandon had checked in alone, and the guest in the room next to him paid in cash. A pattern begins to emerge. Detective Sam Russell, a veteran investigator with the Milwaukee Police Department, reviewed the case. He noticed the similarities almost immediately. Victim found shortly after a negative Yelp review. No witnesses. No evidence linking anyone to the crime scene. Russell was meticulous. He dug through Brandon Lowe's personal history, searching for anything that might explain why someone would target him. No criminal record. No history of violent altercations. Lowe was a traveling salesman, in town on business. Just a guy passing through. The motel's night clerk recalled a man in a dark hoodie checking in next door to Lowe. "Kept the hood up the whole time," she said. Didn't say much. Paid in cash, took the room key, and left. The security cameras in the lobby were broken again. Detective Russell pressed for details. How tall was he? What did his voice sound like? But the clerk's memory was fuzzy. "It was late," she said. "He just seemed normal." Russell's frustration grew. Another dead end. Another victim. No closer to the truth. And then late one night, scrolling through reports, Russell found the Yelp review. The same username as the one linked to the Chicago case. The same pattern of casual, snarky commentary. The same ominous undertone. Russell froze, reading the final line again. "It's quieter now. Won't be staying here again." A chill ran down his spine. Was this a coincidence? Or was someone leaving a trail? The third review. Another month passed. This time the review came from Cleveland, Ohio, a small diner off the highway. Midnight Man 88 struck again. Food was cold. Service was worse. And the guy in the corner booth kept staring at me. Guess he won't be doing that anymore. Never coming back here. 3 days later, the man who had been sitting in the corner booth was found dead. And now Detective Russell knew for certain. This wasn't just a disgruntled Yelp user. This was a killer. The connection no one saw. The murders were 2 weeks apart. 2 different cities. 2 completely different victims. Police had no idea they were linked. Not until Emily Danvers stumbled upon something chilling. Emily wasn't a cop. She wasn't a private investigator. She was a true crime blogger of the obsessive kind. She spent her nights scanning online forums, scrolling through news archives, and combing every corner of the web for leads no one else had noticed. Her blog, Threads of Crime, wasn't widely known, but among her small circle of followers, Emily was considered a relentless digger, someone who noticed patterns others overlooked. She'd been following Derek Hudson's murder for weeks. A cold, execution-style killing in an alley outside a Chicago restaurant. No witnesses, no obvious motive, just a man found slumped in his car. To Emily, it was the kind of case that got under her skin. She'd gathered every public detail she could, find restaurant receipts, mentions of table numbers, timestamps from the limited surveillance footage. She had created a rough timeline of Hudson's movements that night, right down to when he ordered his last drink. And then she came across Brandon Lowe's case in Milwaukee. The pattern wasn't obvious at first. Lowe had been found stabbed to death in a motel room, his body hidden between the mattress and the wall. He wasn't from the area. He had checked in alone. The police had no suspects, no leads, but something in the description of the crime scene made Emily pause. A receipt from a nearby diner, a timestamp from the previous evening, and the Yelp review. At first, Emily dismissed it as coincidence. Plenty of people leave snarky Yelp reviews after a bad experience. But as she read the text more closely, something shifted. It's quieter now, won't be staying here again. A chill ran down her spine. She recognized that tone, that phrasing. She reopened her notes on Hudson's case. There it was. The guy at table 7 wouldn't stop talking. He should have shut up while he had the chance. Both reviews were from the same account, Midnight Man 88. Both reviews were posted within 24 hours of the murders. Both mentioned the victims indirectly. Emily couldn't ignore it anymore. This wasn't coincidence. This was a connection. She took screenshots of the reviews and added them to her ever-growing folder of notes. It was just a hunch, but it was too specific to let go. She drafted an email to her contact at Chicago PD, Detective Mark Tanner, a cop she'd worked with before, who wasn't shy about giving her an earful when her theories went too far. Emily explained her findings, attached the screenshots, and hit send. She didn't expect much. She'd sent tips before, only to have them ignored or brushed off as conspiracy theories. But this time, something was different. Within a day, she got a reply. "We're looking into it." And that's when the detectives started to dig. A killer who loved to complain. Over the next 3 months, police traced over 19 reviews left by Midnight Man 88. The majority of them seemed perfectly ordinary standard Yelp grievances about bad service, overcooked food, or dingy motel rooms. At first glance, nothing about the account suggested it belonged to a serial killer. One review complained that the fries at a diner were way too salty. Another griped about a hotel's poor Wi-Fi connection. A third criticized a bartender's terrible attitude. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would raise a red flag. But 5 of those reviews were different. They stood out not just because of their tone, but because of what happened after they were posted. 5 restaurants, hotels, and Barson, 5 different states, became crime scenes shortly after the reviews appeared. Each murder occurred within 24 hours of the review being posted. Each victim matched a subtle hint buried in the review's text. The pattern emerges the 17th of August, Chicago, Illinois, Derek Hudson murdered. Review posted the next day. The guy at table 7 wouldn't stop talking. He should have shut up while he had the chance. The 3rd of September, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Brandon Lowe murdered review posted the next day. It's quieter now. Won't be staying here again. The 29th of September, Cleveland, Ovlide, unidentified woman murdered in a parking lot. Review posted the next day. Parking lot's too dark. Some people don't know how to mind their own business. The 12th of October, Des Moines, Iowa bartender found strangled and review posted the next day. The bartender shouldn't have ignored me. Maybe they'll listen next time. The 31st of October, Kansas City, Missouri, man beaten to death in a nightclub bathroom. The review posted the next day. People should really learn when to shut up. A closer look at the reviews. The reviews never explicitly mentioned violence. They never directly referenced a murder. But in hindsight, their casual, offhand remarks carried an unmistakable edge. The comments about people not knowing when to shut up, the jabs at individuals who had somehow annoyed the reviewer, the way each post hinted that the reviewer's problem had been solved by the time they left. Police analysts pored over the language, searching for patterns in word choice, phrasing, and punctuation. They discovered that Midnight Man 88 always used proper grammar, full sentences, and never any slang. The tone was cool, detached, almost indifferent. There were no emotional outbursts, no overt threats. But there was a consistency in how the reviewer expressed dissatisfaction with certain individuals and how that dissatisfaction was resolved. The bigger picture, this wasn't just a series of random complaints. This was the work of someone methodical, someone who felt compelled to document their kills not by boasting to the press, but by embedding confessions in plain sight. This wasn't a letter sent to a newspaper or a phone call to a television station. It was a Yelp review. A serial killer had turned a mundane online platform into a twisted diary, hiding his crimes in casual, everyday posts. And for months, no one had noticed. The hunt for Midnight Man 88. Police knew 3 crucial facts. 1, the killer traveled frequently. 2, he paid in cash, leaving no credit card trail. 3, he left Yelp reviews within 24 hours of each crime. The pattern was clear, but catching him was another matter entirely. The FBI was brought in, and Special Agent Margaret Klein took over. A digital ghost. Klein was an expert in tracking digital footprints. She and her team subpoenaed Yelp for the account's IP address. But the killer was smart. He used VPNs to mask his location. Every login came from a different public Wi-Fi network. One session traced back to a public library in Seattle, another to a coffee shop in Indianapolis, a third to a hotel lobby in Denver. Klein's team analyzed hours of surveillance footage from each location. They studied everyone who entered and exited during the time the account was active. They compared descriptions, cross-checked IDs, and looked for recurring faces. But every time, they hit a dead end. A careful predator. The killer was careful. Too careful. He never lingered at the same place for long. He avoided cameras whenever possible. When he was recorded, he kept his head down or wore a hat and sunglasses. Klein's team ran facial recognition on every individual who might match his profile. Nothing came back. They dug into travel records, bus routes, train schedules, flight manifests, anything that might indicate a pattern. Still, the trail was faint. The killer moved quickly, stayed under the radar, and left no trace. Every move he made seemed calculated. Every step designed to keep him one step ahead of the authorities. But then came the Kansas City Review. And one tiny mistake changed everything. The mistake that exposed him. On the 1st of November 2019, another review appeared. Worst steak I've ever had. The cook had no clue what he was doing. The guy in the bathroom found out the hard way. The review itself was no different from the others. It was snarky, short, and dropped just enough hints to feel eerie in retrospect. But the timing and the location gave police a new chance. The murder had taken place at 11:27 p.m. in the nightclub bathroom. Less than half an hour later, at 11:49 p.m., the suspect was seen leaving through the back door. Detectives pieced together the security footage from inside the club and the alley outside. The man wore a gray hoodie, jeans, black sneakers. He kept his head down, never looking directly at the cameras. They almost lost him. But as he walked through the parking lot, he passed by a shiny black SUV. And in that 1 second, his reflection appeared in the car's window. It wasn't much. A faint outline of a face, a nose, a jawline. But it was enough. Klein's team enhanced the image. They used advanced software, sharpening every pixel until the man's features became clear. Then they ran it through facial recognition. And after weeks of chasing shadows, they got a match. Meet Leonard Cross, the man behind the screen. Leonard Cross was 41 years old, a man so unassuming that he had never once raised suspicion. No criminal record, no history of violence. He lived alone in a modest apartment in a quiet Chicago suburb. Cross worked as a traveling consultant, moving from city to city every few weeks. He lived out of a suitcase, staying in motels and extended stay hotels, paying in cash and blending in. To his neighbors, he was polite but quiet, a loner who kept to himself. The FBI set up surveillance outside his apartment. Agents watched him come and go, never seeing anything unusual. But they needed evidence before making an arrest. When they finally got a warrant to search his apartment, they found more than they expected. Inside, they discovered a notebook listing all the places he had reviewed with dates, notes, and details about the victims. Each entry was meticulous, almost clinical. Next to each restaurant or motel name was a brief description of the person who would later be found dead. He had written down their appearance, their behavior, and the time of his visits. A collection of trophies taken from his victims. Wallets, watches, rings, necklaces, all neatly organized in a wooden box. They weren't displayed as souvenirs. They were stored as if they were data points in a larger experiment. Drafted Yelp reviews for future murders. A folder on his desk contained printouts of reviews he hadn't posted yet. Each one referenced a location he planned to visit next. Each one hinted at someone he had already chosen as his next target. He had already picked his next 3 victims, but the FBI stopped him before he could act again. Leonard Cross was arrested at his apartment without incident. He didn't resist. He didn't even look surprised. When agents cuffed him, he simply said, it was just a matter of time. The arrest and the final confession. Leonard Cross was arrested on the 5th of November, 2019, at his apartment in the Chicago suburbs. It started early in the morning, before most of the building's tenants had finished their coffee. A team of FBI agents surrounded the complex, blending into the quiet street with unmarked vehicles and plain clothes. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains as agents moved with purpose, forming a perimeter. The air was thick with anticipation, but the scene remained eerily calm. No shouting, no commotion. When agents knocked on Cross's door, they expected a moment of hesitation, a slight delay. Instead, Leonard Cross answered almost immediately. His demeanor was casual, his face void of any surprise. He was dressed as if he were heading out for an ordinary day jeans, a gray hoodie, sneakers. No trembling hands, no shifty eyes. Just a steady, almost bored expression. The agents asked if they could come in. He nodded and stepped aside. They read him his rights. He didn't interrupt. They placed handcuffs on his wrists. He didn't resist. He simply stared at the floor, then at the lead agent, as if to say, it's about time. The quiet tension made it all the more unsettling for the agents. Some of them had encountered defiant suspects, those who lashed out, who yelled and pleaded. Others broke down, shaking with fear. But Cross was different. He seemed relieved. In the interrogation room later that day, Cross sat quietly, his hands folded on the table. The detectives began with the basics: name, age, occupation. Cross answered without hesitation. He was 41 years old, a traveling consultant by trade. He had no prior arrests, no known history of violence. His responses were calm, measured, and unremarkable. But when they brought up the Yelp reviews, When they placed the printouts of the comments one after another in front of him, Cross tilted his head slightly, a faint smile forming. I have no idea what you're talking about, he said smoothly. The reviews aren't mine. They pressed him. Mentioned the trophies, wallets, watches, personal items from the victims found in his apartment. I just collect things, he replied. I like vintage stuff, flea markets, estate sales, that kind of thing. None of it's connected to any crimes. But when they showed him the surveillance footage from Kansas City, the enhanced image of his reflection in the SUV window, Cross paused. He leaned forward slightly, studying the grainy outline. Then he laughed. It wasn't a nervous chuckle. It was a deep, hearty laugh that filled the small room. One of the detectives exchanged a glance with his partner, uneasy. I guess I should have given myself 5 stars, Cross said, leaning back in his chair. The grin on his face widened. The laughter subsided, leaving a chilling silence. That was the moment everything changed. Cross stopped denying the charges. He started talking, and what he shared sent shivers down the spines of everyone in the room. A methodical approach. Cross didn't just stumble upon his victims, he chose them carefully. He explained his process with a level of detail that made the detective's skin crawl. I travel a lot, he began. You eat out, stay in motels. It's normal. But every now and then, someone stands out, a bartender who ignores you, a noisy neighbor in the next motel room, a guy laughing too loud at the table next to you. They irritate you. He shrugged, as if describing a mundane annoyance. That's when I decide. I finish my meal, I pay my bill, and then I wait. He described sitting in his car, watching the restaurant or hotel, waiting for his target to leave, following them just long enough to be sure no one else was around. Most people are predictable, Cross explained. They go to their cars, they don't look around. They're distracted on their phones, fumbling with their keys. It's easy. He spoke as if it were a game, a strategy he had perfected. He took no pleasure in the act itself, at least, not that he admitted. To him, it was about control, about making a point, and the Yelp reviews were his way of documenting his work, just more honest. When asked why he left the reviews, Cross smirked. People leave reviews when they're happy or upset about something, he said, his voice calm and deliberate. Mine were just more honest. He claimed the reviews weren't about taunting the police. He insisted they weren't meant to leave a trail. To him, they were simply part of the process, a record of who he had dealt with and what he thought of them. He described them as if they were notes in a personal journal. They annoyed me, he said, referring to his victims. So I dealt with them, and I left a review. Simple as that. The more he talked, the more unnerving it became. Cross didn't boast or gloat. He didn't seem angry or remorseful. He was disturbingly matter-of-fact, as if he were recounting a list of errands he had run. For the detectives and agents in the room, his calm demeanor was perhaps the most unsettling detail of all. They weren't dealing with someone who had acted on a moment of rage. They were dealing with a man who planned every step, who carried out each murder with precision, and who then left behind a Yelp review as casually as someone rating a pizza delivery. Leonard Cross wasn't just a killer. He was a meticulous, calculated individual who turned an ordinary online platform into a twisted personal diary. Final thought, how many more were there? After his arrest, Yelp moved quickly to delete his account. The username MidnightMan88 vanished from the platform, the reviews scrubbed from public view. But the investigation didn't end there. Authorities combed through Yelp's data, pulling every review posted by Cross, even those that seemed innocuous. They looked for patterns, places he visited, times he checked in, specific phrases he used. Each review was cross-referenced with local crime reports. The process took months, and the findings were disturbing. There were more reviews than they initially thought, and some of them lined up with unsolved homicides, disappearances, and violent incidents that had never been connected to a serial killer. How many more were his? How many more people died because of his so-called honest reviews? To this day, investigators believe there may be dozens of unsolved cases tied to Leonard Cross's travels. Every time they find a review that fits the pattern, they reopen a cold case file, hoping to piece together the puzzle he left behind. Because if one thing is certain, Leonard Cross wasn't leaving bad reviews. He was leaving confessions,